What's the worst financial decision you've seen someone make?
Experience 1. I knew someone who got a loan for their wedding but decided to blow it all at a casino. Now they have a loan for $20,000 to pay off and nothing to show for it. Experience 2. A friend of mine who is very bad with money and his girlfriend bought some sort of water filtration system from a door-to-door salesman. He has to pay something like $300 per month for this filtration system. He was all stoked because it came with a free set of pots and pans. Fast forward a year and his girlfriend has broken up with him, moved out of the house, and he's had to sell his home because he can't afford to live there. The water filtration system is now sitting in a storage unit where he still pays $300 per month for it because he's on a 2 or 3 year contract. Sorry, the details are fuzzy. We have great water quality in my area. Experience 3. A coworker I used to have worked every second of overtime he could for several years to save up for a house. When he applied for the house loan, he based his mortgage payment on all of the overtime he had been working. I tried to tell him that wasn't a good idea, but he didn't want to hear it. He ended up divorced a few years later because his wife got tired of him always working. Experience 4. My maternal grandmother bought an 8-plex to avoid capital gains when she sold her large house. The apartment complex was in the red and needed a lot of repairs. She hired my father to do them and be an on-site manager. The place started making money. My mom, divorced from my dad, was mad that my grandma bought it in the first place, then hired my dad, then was proved wrong because it was making money. My grandma was in her 90s and my mom pressured her for years, so my grandma finally sold it. That place is in a high market area and is now worth millions. My mom made a poor financial decision based on petty spite. Experience 5. Ran up credit card debt requiring bankruptcy. Once they were able to build credit again, 7 years later, they proceeded to run up a massive amount of debt again, but couldn't go bankrupt again, so they used debt consolidation. The debt didn't come from sudden expenses. They just needed to buy things to feel better. Experience 6. Had a coworker with 5 kids who could all go to USC for free once he had worked there for 15 years, even if he quit. He quit at 14.5 years for a job that barely paid more than he made at USC. Cost all 5 kids the free education at a top school since he couldn't wait 6 more months. Experience 7. My brother's ex fell for a Craigslist scam. She found a motorcycle and the guy needed money up front to pay bills before she even saw it. We told her don't do it, it's a scam. She said she already sent $1,000. Of course, he was never available to show her the bike, and we found out from my brother after they broke up. She actually continued sending him money in hopes of getting the motorcycle. I think she was out $3,000 by the end. Experience 8. My roommate buys DoorDash almost every day. They'll maybe cook for themselves once or twice a week, but other than that they order food in 5 to 6 times a week. I know how much they make, and I have no clue how they can afford that. Experience 9. My former sister-in-law had a thriving medical practice. She got so stressed that she joined the Scientologists and started taking their classes. She opened up 5 to 6 credit cards without telling my brother, maxed the cards out with hundreds of thousands in cash withdrawals, and gave it to that cult. Experience 10. My awful aunt was the trustee for my grandparents' estate. When they passed, she decided to sell their house to a random realtor who put a leaflet on the door. To the realtor, not with the realtor. It wasn't put on the market, and the aunt rejected a matching offer from me after I argued hard to actually list the house and have people bid on it. The realtor slapped a new coat of paint on it and sold it a couple of months later for literally $1 million more than she bought it for. Experience 11. A guy I dated for a short time had been joining an MLM scheme selling insurance. I listened to his monologue and told him I had no money. He was furious and tried to sell insurance to our waiter at the restaurant. He failed again. I'm still laughing today. He was no good guy. Experience 12. My cousin spent 100% of her inheritance and took out a lien on her home to buy a second home in the mountains. Thing is, it was being pushed over by a mountain, and they thought they could fix it. I went and saw it, and every door jamb was crooked and the doors wouldn't shut. They took me down into the basement and they were trying to use I-beams to stop the mountain from pushing on the home. I was just like, what the hell are you doing? That won't solve anything. Fast forward 6 months and they asked me for $50,000 to help and I declined. Fast forward a year and the home collapsed, and now they owe over $300,000 or more for a home that doesn't exist, and if they don't make the payments, they lose their other house too because they used the original home as collateral and could not get insurance on the second home. Total money lost upwards of $700,000. Experience 13. I won't name any names, but a good friend who literally had it all: the high-rise apartment and a house down the street with a pool, sauna, casita, Hummer, Corvettes, a successful business, and about $400,000 in Bitcoin. Threw it all away over a murder for hire, because him and his, non-related to any of the above successes, but from something about 10 years earlier before I knew him, got greedy and no longer wanted to split their financial gain with a third person. So yeah, hired someone on the dark web to carry out the crime across state lines, but communicated everything over text. All three men, my friend, his business partner, and the guy they hired, have been caught and convicted. One received life in prison, and my friend and his business partner are up for the death penalty. Also, he was only 35 when he was originally arrested. Experience 14. Knew someone who answered those scam emails thinking they would get rich. Last I heard, he lost around $50,000. Emptied out savings account and maxed out credit cards. Left in debt and had to move back with ailing parents. Not a close to them at all, but more like a friend of a friend of a friend's cousin. Mother effer just would not listen. Genuinely thought he was going to be a millionaire. They kept stringing him along until the bitter end, and then, poof. The biggest concern his friends had was him trying to milk his ailing parents for their last nickel and dime. Fortunately, he wised up and knew he had been had. The last I heard of him was he had an hourly job somewhere and trying to get out of debt. Experience 15. My brother and his wife were in massive debt, didn't work high-paying jobs, and could no longer afford their 2-bedroom apartment while trying to pay off the debt. They moved back home, into our parents' basement. A week before they moved in, they built a computer, and a year after that, they consciously decided to try to get pregnant, which they did, while still living in the basement and knowing they hadn't improved their financial state whatsoever. Experience 16. This older lady worked part-time in my kitchen. It was a fine dining, fast-paced environment. She would only work about 20 hours per week doing busy work, i.e., peeling vegetables, washing produce, etc. Tasks I knew she could handle and wouldn't get overwhelmed. Unfortunately, her husband passed away and she requested a few months off. I totally understood and said, take all the time you need. Let me know when you feel comfortable coming back to work, if at all. Take care, Barbara. 8 months later, she contacted me for a job. I was more than willing to have her back in my kitchen. I nonchalantly asked her how she was coping with her loss. She broke down in tears. She apparently got a $500,000 insurance payout from her husband's death. Within those months, she attempted to open a restaurant and sink every dime into the establishment. It went out of business in 6 months. She was now broken as an elderly lady having to go back to work. Experience 17. Neighbors. The bread earner died. Her sister and her daughter were left with the place. They could not afford the payments. They would not sell. They let it go to foreclosure even though it had about $120,000 equity in it. New owners came in, did very little cosmetic work, just a little paint, and fixed the fence. They sold it and made a $200,000 profit in about 6 months. Experience 18. I knew a guy who was terrible with money. Worked in a warehouse but spent all his money on drugs and things for his controlling girlfriend. Then one day he came to me to show me his brand new car. probably around $40,000 to $500,000. He takes me for a ride and starts bragging about how he took his pay stub to like 10 of those cash advance places and got $10,000 worth of loans and had been living like a king. It was as if he thought he found some sort of life hack. To this day, I'm not sure if he just thought he wouldn't have to pay it back or what. A couple weeks later, I learned he wasn't paying attention while driving and rear-ended a bus going way over the speed limit and totaled the car. Train wreck of a guy. Experience 19. My dad had his own company, and someone told him it made financial sense that instead of paying himself wages, he should take out a loan from his company. He built up debt for 3 years while working full-time rather than paying himself. It had all sorts of bad tax effects. He was required to pay interest on this, which was then taxed as the profit of the company, and then he paid himself again by paying income taxes. It took him about 10 years to get out of that hole. Then he needed to sell his house because it was too expensive. But the buyer got cold feet on the last day before the sale. Rather than having the buyer pay 10% of the price to get out of the sale, he gave him an extension without an end date. The buyer then took 2 years to think about whether he wanted the house. All the while, my parents needed to keep paying the mortgage and couldn't sell the house to anyone else because of the contract they had with that guy. Brought them close to bankruptcy. I've personally paid a couple of $100 a month to let them pay for the mortgage during that time. Experience 20. My dad worked for the UN and built up quite a good pension while he worked there. A good $400,000. He left the UN in his mid to late 50s. Instead of looking for new work after leaving, he decided to move back to Venezuela, his home country, and just relax for a while. During this sabbatical, his wife and her family talked my dad into putting almost his whole pension into a single stock with her stockbroker nephew. The stock was Venezuelan oil stocks. Maybe you have an idea of how volatile the Venezuelan economy is and how high inflation is there. It's a bad situation. But still, my dad did the thing, and at first, it was okay. But then it wasn't. Predictably, the nephew lost my dad's entire nest egg. The nephew ended up ghosting my dad and his wife. At this point, my dad tried to find new work, but because he was so close to retirement age, he couldn't find anything decent. So, my dad, a PhD graduate who worked at a decently high level at the UN, ended up having to clean houses for money.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's stories. If you want to see more stories, check out these videos or check the links in the description for more videos. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And ring that notification bell.